The Saturday market was a symphony of chaos, a vibrant, overwhelming assault on the senses that usually filled me with a small, quiet joy. The scent of ripe peaches mingled with the earthy smell of potatoes and the sharp, briny aroma of the fishmonger's stall. Voices haggled in a dozen languages, a boisterous chorus punctuated by the laughter of children and the squeak of overloaded cartwheels. But today, the symphony was a cacophony. The vibrant colors blurred into a nauseating smear, and the noise grated on my already frayed nerves. Every shout felt like a personal accusation. My purse, slung over my shoulder, felt unnervingly light, containing nothing but a handful of crumpled bills and a grocery list that was more wishful thinking than a plan. Rent was due on Monday. My landlord, Mr. Henderson, was not a patient man. "Mommy, can we get a pastry?" Mateo, my 5-year-old son, tugged on the hem of my worn cotton dress, his big brown eyes wide with pleading. His twin, brother Luca, a carbon copy down to the smudge of dirt on his cheek, immediately echoed the sentiment. "Please, Mommy, the ones with the chocolate?" My heart did a painful little squeeze. They were good boys, my boys. They so rarely asked for anything. The flaky, chocolate-filled pastries from the corner bakery stall cost $3 each. $6. $6 I needed for milk and bread and maybe, if I stretched it, a small carton of eggs. "Not today, sweethearts," I said, my voice sounding thinner than I intended. I tried to inject a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "We have to get the important stuff first. Maybe next time." Mateo's face fell, his lower lip trembling just enough to send a fresh wave of guilt crashing over me. Luca, ever the stoic, just nodded, his small hand tightening its grip on my own. They were a study in contrasts. My twins. Mateo, all open emotion and boundless energy. Luca, quiet, observant, his old soul eyes missing nothing. The only thing they shared, besides their birthday, was their appearance. Both had mops of unruly dark hair that defied any attempt at taming, and eyes so dark a brown they were almost black, framed by impossibly long lashes. They were beautiful, and they looked nothing like me. My own hair was a plain, mousy brown, my eyes a simple hazel. They also looked nothing like Leo. The thought of him was a familiar, bitter pill. He was supposed to have come over this morning with his share of the month's expenses. It was a paltry sum, one he'd agreed to with the pained air of a man making a grand sacrifice, but it was the sum that would have meant the difference between eggs and no eggs, between paying rent on time and begging Mr. Henderson for another week. He hadn't shown up. His phone went straight to voicemail. The text message I'd sent him hours ago, a simple, desperate question mark, remained unanswered. It was a pattern as predictable as the sunrise. Leo was a ghost, a mirage, of a father who shimmered into existence when it was convenient and evaporated the moment responsibility called. "Okay, hold my hands, both of you, and stay close," I commanded, my voice sharper now. The crowd was thickening, a river of bodies, and the last thing I needed was to lose one of them. We navigated past a stall piled high with gleaming red peppers and purple eggplants, the smell of fresh basil perfuming the air. I kept my eyes fixed on the budget-friendly vegetable stand at the far end of the market, mentally calculating and recalculating. Potatoes, onions, carrots, the staples, the things that could be stretched into a soup that might last 3 days. My focus was so absolute, so tunneled on the numbers rolling through my head, that I didn't see the man until it was too late. Mateo, ever the impulsive one, let go of my hand for a split second, lunging for a dropped orange that had rolled near his feet. He was quick, a little bolt of lightning, and he cannoned directly into a pair of legs as solid as ancient tree trunks. The man didn't so much as stumble. Mateo, however, bounced off him and landed on his backside with a surprised oof. Mortification washed over me, hot and immediate. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry." I rushed forward, pulling Mateo to his feet and brushing the dust from his shorts. "Are you okay, sweetie?" I looked up, my apology ready on my lips, prepared to meet the annoyed gaze of a stranger. But it wasn't a stranger. The world tilted on its axis. The noise of the market, the smells, the people, it all dissolved into a low, distant hum. Time itself seemed to stutter and freeze. He stood there, impossibly tall, dressed not in the casual Saturday attire of the other market-goers, but in a perfectly tailored dark suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. It was a uniform of power, wealth, and intimidation. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving planes, a masterpiece of brutalist and architecture, a strong jaw, a straight nose, a mouth that looked like it had never learned to smile, and his eyes. They were the same eyes I saw every morning and every night, the same impossibly dark, almost black eyes that stared back at me from the faces of my children. Dante. I hadn't even known his last name. It had been one night, 6 years ago, a lifetime ago. I was younger then, a nursing student drowning in exams and student loans, dragged out by a friend to a ridiculously expensive downtown bar for a birthday. He was there, a shadow in the corner, exuding a silent, magnetic pull that drew every eye in the room. He hadn't said much. He didn't need to. He'd bought me a drink, his voice a low rumble like aged whiskey, and we'd ended up back at his hotel, a place so luxurious it felt like another planet. I remembered the scent of his skin, a clean, masculine scent of soap, and something uniquely him. I remembered the shocking, almost frightening intensity in his gaze, and then I remembered waking up alone in the morning, in a tangle of 1,000 thread count sheets, with a stack of $100 bills on the nightstand, enough to pay my rent for 6 months. I'd taken the money, my cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and desperate relief, and I had never seen him again, until now. His gaze was a physical force. It dropped from my stunned face, down to Matteo, who was now hiding behind my leg. Then it shifted, slowly, deliberately, to Luca, who stood frozen at my other side, his small hand still clutching mine, his dark eyes wide and unblinking as he stared up at the giant man. The silence stretched, a taut, vibrating wire in the midst of the market's din. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the flicker of disbelief warring with cold, hard logic. He looked at them. Then he looked at me, then back at them. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along the sharp line. The air crackled with a sudden, terrifying voltage. The faint, amused indifference he might have shown, a clumsy child had vanished, replaced by an unnerving stillness, a predatory focus that made the hair on my arms stand on end. His blood, I imagined, must have run cold. Mine had turned to ice, he knew. In that single, drawn-out moment, in the crowded, noisy, sun-drenched market, he knew. These boys, my boys, were his. His voice, when it finally came, was a low, dangerous whisper that cut through the surrounding noise as if it were the only sound in the world. How old are they? It wasn't a question. It was a demand for a fact he already suspected. My own voice was trapped in my throat, a knot of pure panic. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I just shook my head, a tiny, involuntary movement of denial. But denial was a flimsy shield against the tidal wave of his certainty. He took a half-step closer, and I flinched, pulling my sons tighter against me. The move was pure instinct, the primitive urge of a mother protecting her. Young. His dark eyes narrowed Fedor's, not in anger, but with an intensity that stripped me bare. He saw my fear, my desperation, the worn fabric of my dress, the cheap sandals on my feet, the terror in my eyes. He saw it all, and it seemed to fuel the cold fire in his gaze. "They are 5, he stated, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. He was running the numbers. 6 years ago, a 9-month pregnancy, 5 years of their lives. The math was simple and brutal. They just had their birthday, didn't they? Last month. A gasp escaped my lips. How could he know? It was a lucky guess. It had to be. A cruel, terrifyingly accurate guess. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My silence was its own confession. He crouched down, a shockingly fluid movement for a man so large. He wasn't on their level. He was still a mountain cambiamento their molehill, but the gesture was clearly meant to be disarming. It wasn't. It was terrifying. He was a predator getting closer to his prey. He ignored Matteo, who was now trying to burrow his way into my leg, and focused his entire, unnerving attention on Luca. Luca, my brave, silent boy, didn't shrink away. He met the man's gaze, his own small, serious face, a perfect, miniature replica of the one before him. "What is your name?" Dante asked, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. Luca's grip on my hand was like a vice, but he answered, his little voice clear and steady. "Luca." Dante's eyes flickered. Then he looked at Matteo. "And you?" Matteo mumbled into my dress, his voice a muffled squeak. "Matteo." Dante's gaze rose slowly, climbing from my son's faces back to mine. The last vestiges of doubt had been burned away, leaving behind a chilling, absolute ownership. It was in his eyes, in the set of his jaw, in the very air around him. He had laid his claim. He straightened to his full, intimidating height, pulling a sleek black phone from his inside pocket. He never broke eye contact with me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure animal fear. What was he doing? Calling the police? Claiming I'd stolen his children? My mind raced, a whirlwind of impossible, catastrophic scenarios. His thumb moved kungung the screen, and he lifted the phone to his ear. His words were few, clipped, and spoken in that same low, authoritative tone. "Marco, the market on 8th. Bring everyone. Now." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Everyone? What did that mean? The world pull us on. The shoppers float around us, oblivious to the invisible dome of high-stakes drama that had just descended upon our small, pathetic patch of asphalt. I felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, my wings beating uselessly against the inevitable. "You and the boys are coming with me," he said. Again, it was not a request. It was a statement of fact, an alteration of my reality spoken into existence by sheer force of will. "No," I whispered, the word tasting like ash. "No, we're not. I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just—" "I can," he interrupted, his voice dropping even lower, imbued with a quiet menace that was more frightening than any shout. "Their lives, and yours, are about to change. You can either come willingly, or my men can carry you. The choice is yours, but the outcome is the same." And then I heard it, a low, powerful rumble that grew steadily louder, drowning out the market's cheerful din. Heads began to turn. The river of people Guangok then parted. It was like a scene from a movie, surreal and terrifying. 4 large black SUVs, their tinted windows like the eyes of soulless machines, pulled up to the curb, their engines a synchronized throbbing purr. They were identical, polished to a menacing gleam, their presence screaming money, power, and danger. The doors opened in unison. Men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged. They were big men, all of them, with blank faces and watchful eyes, moving with a quiet, professional efficiency that was utterly chilling. One of them, a man with graying temples and a face seva of stone, approached Dante, his eyes flicking over me and the boys before returning to his boss. "This must be Marco." "Sir," Marco said, his voice a respectful murmur. "Marco, this is Elena, and these," Dante said, his hand gesturing toward my sons, "are Luca and Matteo. They will be coming with us. See to it." My world narrowed to a pinprick of terror. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare. I was a nurse. I lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. I worried about the price of milk. I did not belong in this world of black cars and men with hard eyes who moved like shadows. "No, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "You can't do this. They're my children." Dante's gaze was unyielding, a magnet holding me in place. "They are my children," he corrected, the words landing like blows. "And I am taking them home. You are their mother. Therefore, you will come too." He framed it as logic, as a foregone conclusion. He was protecting his assets. We were his assets. Marco took a step toward us. He didn't reach for me, but his presence was an impassable wall. His voice was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to his intimidating frame. "Ma'am, please. It will be easier for the children if you don't fight." He was right. Matteo was starting to cry, his small body trembling. Luca's face was pale, his eyes huge and frightened. My resistance was only terrifying them more. My fight, my will. It was nothing against this. It was like trying to hold back the ocean with my bare hands. Defeated, my shoulders slumped. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. I was being kidnapped, in broad daylight, and no one was doing a thing. Dante gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Marco moved with practiced ease, one hand lightly on my back, guiding me forward. Another man, equally large, crouched down and spoke softly to the boys. "Hey guys, want to go for a ride in a cool car? It has TVs inside." Matteo's sobs hitched, his curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. Luca, ever watchful, looked to me for guidance. I gave a tiny, defeated nod, my throat too tight to speak. That was all it took. The man scooped Matteo up in one arm and gently took Luca's hand, leading him toward the lead vehicle. They didn't even look back. I was herded into the same SUV. The door closed with a heavy, final-sounding thud, sealing us inside a world of silent, air-conditioned luxury. The scent of rich leather and Dante's personal cologne filled my lungs. The tinted windows turned the bright, chaotic market into a distant, silent film. Dante slid in beside me, his presence taking up all the air, all the space. He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead as the car pulled, smoothly away from the curb, leaving my old life, my simple, struggling, knowable life, behind in a cloud of dust and exhaust. We were being extracted, ripped from our world and transplanted into his, and the process was as swift and merciless as surgery without anesthesia. The journey was a blur of silent, opulent terror. The SUV moved through the city with an unnatural ease, traffic seeming to part for it. I sat ramrod straight, my hands clenched in my lap, a chasm of cold leather separating me from Dante. In the seats facing us, my sons were buckled in, their initial fear now replaced by wide-eyed awe. The man who had spoken to them, one of Dante's anonymous, suited soldiers, had turned on a small television screen embedded in the back of the front seat. A cartoon turtle was now swimming across the screen, and Matteo was giggling, his earlier trauma completely forgotten. Luca was quieter, but his eyes were glued to the screen, his small body relaxed. Children were so resilient. Or maybe they were just easily bought by cartoons and cool cars. The thought was a bitter one. I risked a glance at the man beside me. He was staring out the window, his profile as severe and unreadable as a Roman statue. What was he thinking? Was there any remorse in him? Any understanding of the violence he had just committed against my life? He had ripped it apart at the seams. And for what? An accident of biology. A single, careless night 6 years ago. It didn't seem fair. It didn't seem possible. He must have felt my gaze, because he turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto mine. The intensity there was still overwhelming, but now, underneath the cold command, I thought I detected something else. A flicker of uncertainty? No, that wasn't it. It was something harder to define. A deep, resonant curiosity, as if he were studying a puzzle he had just discovered he owned. "They are healthy?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the seat. The question was so unexpected, so clinical, that it took me a moment to answer. "Yes, of course they are. Any medical issues? Allergies?" "No, nothing. Matteo had ear infections when he was a baby, but that's it." The words came out automatically. I was a nurse. Taking a medical history was second nature, even if it was for my own kidnapper. He nodded, a short, sharp dip of his chin, as if filing the information away. "Good." He turned his gaze back to the window. The conversation, if it could be called that, was over. We left the familiar, gritty streets of my neighborhood behind, transitioning seamlessly into a part of the city I had only ever seen in magazines. The buildings grew taller, sleeker. The cars were more expensive. Soon we were climbing a winding road, the city sprawling out below us like a map. Enormous houses, more like private resorts, were hidden behind high walls and elaborate gates. The air itself seemed cleaner up here, rarefied. The SUV slowed, turning into a driveway Ida, a gate that looked like it belonged to a fortress. It was a monstrous thing of black iron and modern design. It slid open silently, and we proceeded up a long tree-lined drive. And then I saw it. The house. Mansion was too small a word. It was a compound. A sprawling structure of glass, steel, and dark gray stone. It looked less like a home and more like a modern art museum or the headquarters of a Fortune 500 company. It was beautiful, in a cold, intimidating way, and it was utterly devoid of warmth. It was a perfect reflection of the man who owned it. The car glided to a halt under a wide portico, and the doors were opened to zanging before the engine was off. The men who had driven us were already standing at attention. Marco appeared and opened my door. I didn't move. My feet felt bolted to the floor. Elena. Dante's voice was quiet, but it held a steel thread of command. Get out of the car. My body obeyed even as my mind screamed in protest. I slid out, my cheap sandals feeling profane on the polished stone driveway. Marco was already helping the boys out, who were now staring, mouths agape, at the sheer scale of the place. Whoa, Matteo breathed, pointing a small finger. Is this a castle? A flicker of something amusement, maybe crossed Dante's face. It was there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Something like that, he said. He led the way, his long strides eating up the ground. I had no choice but to follow, my sons flanking me, their small hands once again lost in mine. The inside was even more breathtaking and soulless than the outside. The front door, a massive slab of dark wood, opened into a 2-story foyer with a floor of gleaming white marble. A staircase that looked like a floating ribbon of steel and glass curved its way to the second floor. The walls were mostly glass, offering a panoramic view of a meticulously manicured garden and a sparkling blue infinity pool that seemed to drop off into the sky. The furniture was sparse, minimalist, and undoubtedly worth more than I would make in a lifetime. A single, enormous abstract painting, a chaotic slash of red on a black canvas, was the only decoration on one wall. It was a room designed to impress and intimidate, not to comfort. This was not a home. It was a statement. A woman in a neat gray uniform appeared as if from nowhere. She was older, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun and a completely neutral expression. Sir, welcome home. Isabel. Dante acknowledged her with a nod. These are my sons, Luca and Matteo. And this is Elena. They will be staying with us. Have the guest wing prepared. 2 bedrooms. And have a meal sent up. Something for the children. Of course, sir, she said, her gaze sweeping over us with a professional, uncurious eye. She had probably seen stranger things. She turned to me. If you and the children will follow me, ma'am. Ma'am. The title was so absurd, I almost laughed. I was a girl in a faded dress, being held prisoner in a palace. I looked at Dante, a desperate, pleading question in my eyes. He met my gaze, his expression unyielding. Go with her, he commanded softly. Get them settled, then you and I will talk. The guest wing was larger than my entire apartment. My room was a study in luxurious neutrality. Beige walls, a king-sized bed with a mountain of white pillows, a private balcony overlooking the city. The adjoining room for the boys was similar, but 2 beds had already been made up, and on each was a pile of new toys, still in their boxes. Lego sets, action figures, art supplies. It was a child's fantasy, a blatant, calculated bribe, and it was working. Matteo and Luca were already tearing into the boxes, their earlier fear a distant memory. A cart arrived with a quiet whir, pushed by another uniformed servant. On it were plates of chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs, macaroni and cheese, and tall glasses of juice. My sons fell upon the food like starving wolves. I, on the other hand, felt like I was going to be sick. I stood by the window, watching them, feeling a profound and unsettling disconnect. They were happy. They were safe. They were surrounded by a level of comfort and privilege I could never have provided. And it had all been accomplished through an act of brutal, terrifying force. I was living a contradiction, trapped in a beautiful cage where the bars were made of my children's well-being. After the boys had eaten and were starting to droop with exhaustion, Isabel returned. I can watch the children, ma'am, if you'd like to get cleaned up. There are some things for you in the closet. Mr. Moretti is waiting for you in his study. Some things. I opened the closet and my breath caught. It was filled with clothes. Designer dresses with the tags still on, silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, soft jeans. On the floor were a dozen pairs of shoes from elegant heels to comfortable-looking sneakers. It was a whole new wardrobe, in my size. The thought, the sheer chilling efficiency of it, sent a shiver down my spine. He had known my size. How? Had his man Marco assessed me that quickly? Or was it something else? Some detail he had catalogued and stored away 6 years ago. I chose a simple pair of black trousers and a cream-colored silk blouse. They felt alien on my skin. After a quick shower in a bathroom that was bigger than my kitchen, a cavern of marble and chrome, I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a stranger, a well-dressed prisoner. Steeling myself, I followed Isabel's quiet directions down a long, silent hallway to his study. The study was the heart of his empire. I could feel it. It was paneled in dark, fragrant wood, one wall lined with books, another with a bank of monitors, showing security feeds from every angle of the property. He was sitting behind a massive desk, the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation through the floor-to-ceiling window behind him. He wasn't looking at the screens. He was looking at me. "Sit down, Elena," he said, gesturing to one of the 2 leather chairs facing his desk. I sat on the edge of the seat, my back straight, my hands once again clenched in my lap. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with unsaid things. He watched me for a long moment, his gaze analytical, searching. "I know this is," he began, then seemed to search for the word. "A shock? A shock?" I repeated, a bubble of incredulous, hysterical laughter rising in my throat. "You abducted me and my children from a public market. You've locked us in this museum." Shock doesn't begin to cover it. He didn't react to my outburst. His expression remained unchanged. "It was necessary. You are in my world now. Things are done differently here." "Your world?" I shot back. "I don't want to be in your world. I want my life back. I want to take my sons and go home." "This is your home now," he stated, the words as final as a death sentence. "And they are not just your sons. They are mine. I will not have my blood, my heirs, living in that." He gestured vaguely, a dismissive wave that encompassed my apartment, my neighborhood, my entire existence. The insult was so profound, so dismissive. It stole my breath. "You have no right," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "I have every right," he countered, leaning forward, his forearms resting on the polished surface of the desk. He was a king holding court. "I will give you and the boys everything. You will never have to worry about money, or rent, or the price of milk again. They will have the best education, the best health care, the best of everything. They will be protected. You will be protected." "Protected? Or imprisoned?" I challenged. "The two are not mutually exclusive," he said, his voice a low, chilling calm. "There are conditions, of course. You will live here, under my roof. You will not contact anyone from your old life without my permission. And you will tell me everything about the man you've had them call father." The mention of Leo was like a splash of cold water. "He has nothing to do with this." Dante's eyes narrowed dangerously. "He has everything to do with this. Has another man been raising my sons? Has he put his hands on them? On you?" The questions were laced with a possessiveness so potent it was almost a physical force. It was the sound of a predator scenting a rival on his territory. "No, it's not like that," I said quickly, a strange, instinctual need to de-escalate rising in me. "Leo, he's their father. That's what they know. But he's not really in the picture. He's unreliable." "Unreliable," Dante repeated the word, tasting it, his lip curling in a faint sneer. "I will handle Leo. He will no longer be a factor." "Handle him? What does that mean?" I asked, my blood running cold. "It means I will remove the problem, permanently." His gaze was flat and hard. He meant it. He would erase Leo from our lives as easily as he had ordered my sons a plate of chicken nuggets. The sheer, terrifying power he wielded was absolute. I stared at him, my mind reeling. This was the offer. A life of unimaginable luxury and security. For the price of my freedom. For the price of my soul. But when I thought of the constant, grinding anxiety of my life, The fear of the first of the month, the shame of not being able to afford a simple pastry for my children. Was it really a choice? He was offering me a golden cage, but my current life was also a cage, one made of poverty and fear. He seemed to sense my internal conflict, the war between my pride and my primal need to see my children safe. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning softly. His expression softened, just a fraction, the hard edges blurring for a moment. "You're wondering why," he said, his voice losing some of its commanding edge, becoming something more personal, more intimate. "Why this? Why so fast? So absolute?" I just nodded, unable to speak. He was silent for a long time, his gaze distant, fixed on a point somewhere in the glittering cityscape behind me. "My mother," he began, his voice a low, rough murmur. "She was a beautiful woman, full of life. She fell in love with a weak man, a man who couldn't protect her. He made promises he couldn't keep, got involved with people he shouldn't have, and when things got difficult, he left her. He left her vulnerable, alone." He paused, and in the silence, I could hear the echoes of an old, deep pain. This wasn't just a story. It was a scar on his soul. The people he owed money to, they came for her instead. They wanted to send him a message. His jaw clenched, the muscle jumping, violently. I was 10 years old. I was in my room. I heard her screaming. I was just a boy. I couldn't do anything. I hid under my bed and I listened as they broke her. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with his grief and rage. I felt a pang of empathy so sharp it was like a physical blow. I, a nurse, had seen Manav suffering in all its forms, but the agony etched on his face in that moment was profound. "I found her afterward," he continued, his voice now barely a whisper. "She was never the same. The light in her was gone. She died 2 years later. They said it was pneumonia, but she died that night. She died because she was unprotected." He finally looked at me, his dark eyes burning with a conviction that was terrifying and absolute. "I swore on her grave that I would never be that man, that I would never be weak, and that anything and anyone that was mine, I would protect with my life, with everything I have." He didn't have to say the next words. I heard them anyway. "You are mine. The boys are mine." This wasn't just about pride or ego. This was about him rewriting his own past. He wasn't just protecting me and his sons. He was protecting the ghost of his mother. He was saving the boy who had hidden, helpless, under the bed. My situation, my vulnerability, my life with Leo, it was a living reenactment of his greatest trauma, and he would not, could not, allow it to play out the same way. The gilded cage he was offering wasn't just a prison. In his mind, it was a sanctuary, the only way to guarantee our survival. And I was beginning to realize that, in his world, he might just be right. The days that followed were a surreal dream. I woke up each morning in the silent, opulent bedroom, the sun streaming through the vast windows, and for a fleeting moment, I'd think it was all a nightmare. Then the reality would settle in, heavy and suffocating. I was a guest, a prisoner, a prize. I was a kept woman, though no one used such a crude term. The staff were unfailingly polite, calling me ma'am and catering to my every unspoken need. Fresh clothes appeared in the closet. My favorite tea was on the nightstand before I even knew I wanted it. Books I'd once mentioned wanting to read were stacked on a table. I was being observed, studied, my preferences catalogued and met with a silent, unnerving efficiency. The boys, however, were in paradise. They had a yard bigger than any park they'd ever seen, a swimming pool, and a playroom that was a child's fantasy. A young, cheerful tutor named Anna arrived each morning to work with them on letters and numbers, a gentle introduction to the elite education Dante had promised. They were laughing more than I had ever heard them laugh. They were eating well, sleeping in soft beds, and they were utterly, blissfully unaware of the price. Their joy was a constant, painful reminder of my own compromised position. Every giggle was a golden bar in my cage. Dante was a ghost in his own home. He would leave before we woke up and return long after the boys were asleep. Sometimes I would see him from my balcony, a dark figure crossing the lawn, speaking into his phone, his shoulders tight with Unakahi burdens. We existed in separate orbits, 2 planets circling the same sun, our children. But sometimes, our orbits would intersect. He would appear in the playroom doorway late at night, watching his sons sleep, a look on his face I couldn't decipher. It was a mixture of fierce pride and a profound, aching loneliness. One evening, about a week after our arrival, I was sitting by the pool, watching the boys splash in the shallow end under the watchful eye of Marco, who had apparently added lifeguard to his long list of duties. I was reading one of the books that had magically appeared, but the words were just black marks on a page. My mind was elsewhere, circling the same endless loop of fear and confusion. A shadow fell over me. I looked up to see Dante standing there, still in his suit, his tie loosened. "They seem happy," he said, his gaze on the pool. "They're children. A pool and endless toys are enough to make them happy," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. He turned his gaze to me. "And you? Are you happy, Elena?" "I'm your prisoner," I said flatly. "Happiness isn't part of the arrangement." "It could be," he said, his voice quiet. He sat in the chair next to mine, a surprising move. The proximity of him, the scent of his cologne, the sheer physical presence of him was still unnerving. "This is difficult, I know, but it is necessary." "Necessary for who? For you? To soothe your own ghosts?" The words were out before I could stop them. They hung in the air between us, a direct challenge. I expected him to get angry, to shut down. Instead, a flicker of something raw and vulnerable crossed his face. "Yes," he admitted, his voice rough. "For me, and for them, you don't understand the world I live in. You see these walls as a prison. I see them as a fortress. And right now, that fortress is more important than ever." "What do you mean?" I asked, a new knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. He hesitated, seeming to weigh his words. "News travels fast in my world. The fact that I have a family now, it is not a secret. Some will see it as a sign of strength. Others," he paused, his gaze growing hard, "will see it as a new vulnerability, a weakness to be exploited." My blood ran cold. Are you saying we're in danger?" "You are with me," he said, the words a dark promise. "You will always be in some measure of danger, but I will not let anyone get to you. To them, that is why you must stay here. It is the only place I can guarantee your safety." Suddenly, the gilded cage didn't seem so metaphorical. The beautiful, sterile mansion transformed in my mind into a necessary bunker. The men in suits weren't just guards, they were soldiers. This wasn't about Dante's possessiveness, or not entirely. This was about survival. He was using a new, external threat to justify his control, to reframe my confinement as essential protection. And the most terrifying part was, I believed him. I had seen the look in his eyes when he spoke of his rivals. This was not a game. "Who?" I whispered. "Who would want to hurt us?" He looked at me, his eyes dark and serious. "A family from the East, the Petrovs. They are animals. They have no code, no honor, and they have wanted what is mine for a very long time. Finding out about you and the boys, it's like blood in the water for sharks like them." The image was horrifyingly vivid. I looked over at my sons, still splashing and laughing, completely innocent and unaware. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Dante had ripped us out of our simple, poor life, but in doing so, he had thrust us into the crosshairs of a war I couldn't begin to comprehend. "I am handling it," he said, his voice a low, reassuring growl. It was the same tone he'd used when he'd spoken of Leo. "The situation is under control, but you must understand why you cannot leave, why you must listen to me. Your life is no longer just your own." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. The brief, almost human connection vanished, replaced by the cold, commanding mask of the dawn. "I have to take this," he said, standing up. He walked a few paces away, his back to me. His voice was too low to hear the words, but the tone was sharp, lethal. I watched him, a storm of conflicting emotions churning inside me. I hated him for what he had done, for the fear and uncertainty he had brought into my life. But as I watched him stand guard over his kingdom, as I looked at my safe, happy children, a traitorous part of me was grateful. He was a monster, yes, but he was our monster. And he had just told me there were other, worse monsters in the dark, and he was the only thing standing between them and my sons. The bars of my cage had never felt more like a protective embrace. The next day, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It grew tighter, more electric. There were more guards, their presence more overt. I saw Marco speaking into his wrist, his face grim. The men who were usually discreetly positioned around the property now stood in plain sight, Tum and the Mukwang constantly scanning the perimeter. The fortress was on high alert. I found Dante that evening in his study. The bank of security monitors was on, and he was staring at them intently. He didn't seem to notice me enter. I stood in the doorway, my arms wrapped around myself. "What's happening?" I asked. He turned, and I saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes. But underneath it was a cold, controlled fury. "Leo," he said, the name a curse on his lips. "Leo? What about? Him?" My heart started to hammer. Did you handle him?" I was almost afraid to hear the answer. "I sent Marco to talk to him this morning," Dante said, his voice tight. "To make him an offer, a generous one. Money, a plane ticket, a new life somewhere far away, in exchange for signing away his parental rights and disappearing forever." "Parental rights?" I scoffed. "He barely has any. It's a formality. A loose end I wanted tied," Dante said, his eyes returning to the screens. "But your Leo is not just unreliable. He is stupid and greedy." "What did he do?" I asked, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. Instead of taking the deal, he thought he'd hit the jackpot. He tried to negotiate. He mentioned the boys, mentioned you, mentioned that he knew who I was. He thought he could blackmail me. Dante's voice was dangerously quiet. And then he made a phone call, to the wrong people. My blood turned to ice. "The Petrovs." He nodded, his jaw so tight I thought it might crack. He thought he could sell his information to the highest bidder. He told them about the boys, their names, their age. He gave my enemies the one weapon I have spent my life trying to avoid. I felt dizzy, leaning against the doorframe for support. Leo. Stupid, selfish, short-sighted Leo. In his greed, he had signed our death warrants. He had painted a target on his own children's backs. "Marco took care of him," Dante said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. I didn't dare ask what "took care of him" meant. I didn't want to know. "Leo is no longer a factor. He will not be bothering you, or anyone, ever again. But the damage is done. The Petrovs know. They know I have sons. And they know where we are." The personal threat of Leo had been neutralized, brutally and efficiently. But in his final, idiotic act, he had unleashed a far greater one. The confrontation I had feared was no longer a hypothetical. It was here. It was now. "What are you going to do?" I whispered. Dante finally looked away from the monitors, his full attention on me. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a chilling, absolute resolve. It was the face of a king going to war. "I am going to end this. I am going to cut the head off the snake so it can never threaten my family again." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping in front of me. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from him. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his thumb stroking my skin. It was the most contact we'd had, the most intimate gesture, and it was happening on the precipice of bloodshed. "You will stay here," he commanded, his voice low and intense. "You will not leave this house. You will not go near the windows. Marco and his men will be here. No one will get in. Do you understand me, Elena?" I was too terrified to do anything but nod. "Good." He held my gaze for a moment longer, his dark eyes filled with 1,000 unreadable emotions. Then he turned and walked out of the room, his stride full of deadly purpose. I heard him giving orders in the hall, his voice a low, rapid-fire command. Doors opened and closed. The low rumble of car engines started up outside. I ran to the window, ignoring his order, and watched as the fleet of black SUVs from the market lined up in the driveway. Men in dark suits, some now carrying long, thin bags, got into the cars. Dante appeared, shrugging on a dark coat over his suit. He didn't look back at the house. He got into the lead car, and one by one, the convoy pulled away, their red taillights disappearing down the winding road, leaving the house in an unnerving silence. He was gone to fight monsters to protect us. And as I stood there, trembling in his palatial, empty study, I realized with a sickening lurch that I was praying for the monster to come home safe. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. The mansion, usually just quiet, became tomb silent. The air was thick with a tension so palpable I could taste it, metallic and sharp, like the air before a lightning strike. Marco and his men were ghosts, silent and watchful. I saw them patrolling the grounds, their silhouettes moving against the backdrop of the city lights, their professionalism a thin veil over the lethal potential they held. They were a wall of flesh and steel between us and the horrors of Dante's world. I put the boys to bed, my hands shaking as I tucked them in. They were blissfully unaware, their dreams filled with cartoons and swimming pools, not rival families and bloodshed. I kissed their foreheads, inhaling the sweet, innocent scent of them, and a wave of primal fear, so strong it nearly brought me to my knees, washed over me. Dante had brought this danger to our door, but he was also the only one who could stand against it. My fate, and my son's fates, were completely in his hands. I couldn't sleep. I paced the length of my luxurious room, a caged animal waiting for news of the hunt. Every creak of the house, every distant siren, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept going to the window, staring out at the empty driveway, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. What was happening out there? Was he okay? The thought that he might not come back, that he might be killed, was a physical pain, and the realization of that pain terrified me more than anything. When had I started to care if he lived or died? When had this man, my kidnapper, my captor, become the center of my world? Sometime in the nebulous hours before dawn, I heard the cars. The low, familiar rumble of the SUVs coming up the drive. My heart leaped into my throat. I ran to the window, pressing my face against the cool glass. The convoy was back. The cars pulled up, and men began to get out, moving with a weary, heavy slowness. Then I saw him, Dante, emerged from the lead car. He was alive. A tidal wave of relief, so powerful it made me dizzy, crashed over me. But he was not unscathed. He was leaning heavily on Marco, and even in the dim light of the portico, I could see that the side of his suit jacket was dark and wet with blood. I didn't think. I just ran. Down the floating staircase, my bare feet slapping against the cold marble of the foyer. I threw open the heavy front door just as Marco was helping him inside. "Dante!" My voice was a choked cry. He looked up, his face pale and drawn, etched with pain and exhaustion. But his eyes, when they met mine, were blazing with a fierce, triumphant light. "It's over," he rasped, his voice raw. "The Petrovs are finished. They will never threaten you again." My training as a nurse took over, a familiar, comforting instinct in the midst of chaos. "Get him to the study," I ordered Marco, my voice firm. "Lay him on the sofa. Someone bring me the medical kit. The large one. Now." Marco, who took orders from no one but Dante, looked at his boss. Dante gave a small, pained nod. "Do as she says." Without another word, Marco guided Dante into the study and helped him ease onto the long leather sofa. I was right behind them. "Help me get his jacket and shirt off," I said, my hands already moving, assessing. The wound was on his left side, a nasty gash along his ribs. It looked like a graze from a bullet or a knife wound. It was bleeding sluggishly, but it was deep. A servant appeared with a comprehensive medical kit, the kind I'd only ever seen in an emergency room. I knelt beside him, my fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by a laser-like focus. "This is going to hurt," I said, my voice all business. "I've had worse," he grunted, his eyes squeezed shut as I began to clean the wound. The room was silent except for the hiss of the antiseptic and Dante's sharp, controlled breaths. I worked quickly, my hands steady. I disinfected the gash, my fingers probing gently to assess the depth. It was clean, no bullet fragments, thank God, but it would need stitches. "You're a nurse," he stated, his eyes opening, watching me. Yes, I said, not looking up from my work as I threaded a suture needle. You knew that. I know your blood type, your mother's maiden name, and what you scored on your nursing board exams, he said, his voice a low rumble. Of course I knew you were a nurse. The casual admission of his surveillance, the depth of his knowledge about me, should have terrified me. But right now, all I felt was a strange, numbing acceptance. I began to stitch the wound, my movements precise and economical. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but I could feel the tension radiating from his body, the rigid control he was exerting over his own pain. Marco stood silently in the corner, a stoic statue, but his eyes never left Dante. The loyalty was absolute. As I worked, the silence stretched, but it was different now. It wasn't the tense, angry silence of our previous confrontations. It was something else. Softer, more intimate. Here, in the dead of night, in his temple of power, he was wounded, and I was the one fixing him. The power dynamic had shifted, just for a moment. Thank you, Elena, he said, his voice rough, when I had tied off the last stitch and was applying a clean dressing. I looked up, my gaze meeting his. The fire was banked now, leaving his eyes dark and deep and full of a raw vulnerability I had never seen before. He looked from my eyes to my hands, which were now covered in his blood. I was afraid, he whispered, the admission costing him more, I suspected, than the pain of his injury. Not of them, but of not coming back, of leaving you and the boys alone. My breath caught in my throat. The confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, shimmering thing. He had stripped away the armor, the layers of command and control, and showed me the man underneath. A man who was afraid of losing his family. Our family. I didn't know what to say. So I just finished taping the bandage, my fingers brushing against his warm skin. The touch was electric. He didn't pull away. Instead, he reached up, his hand covering mine, his grip surprisingly gentle. Stay, he murmured, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. Don't go back to your room. Stay with me. It wasn't a command this time. It was a plea from a wounded man who had just returned from war and didn't want to be alone. I looked at our hands, his large and strong covering mine, stained with his blood. I looked at his face, pale and exhausted but so intensely focused on me. The war outside was over. The war inside me, the conflict between my fear and this strange, terrifying new emotion, was reaching its own climax. Slowly, I nodded. He squeezed my hand, a silent message of gratitude. Then, with a pained grunt, he pushed himself up. Marco, you are dismissed. Get some rest. Sir, Marco said, giving me a look I couldn't quite interpret, respect maybe, before turning and leaving the room, closing the heavy doors softly behind him. We were alone. The adrenaline of the emergency was fading, leaving a different kind of tension in its wake, a humming, resonant awareness of each other. He was still holding my hand. You saved my life 6 years ago, you know, I said, the words coming out in a whisper. That money you left, it was everything. I was about to drop out of school. I was so desperate. He looked surprised. I didn't want you to think. I wasn't paying for a service. I didn't know how to see you again, and I couldn't stand the thought of you needing anything. He had wanted to see me again. The thought was a revelation. This wasn't just about the boys. It had started with me. He slowly, carefully, got to his feet, his hand still holding mine, drawing me up with him. He was wincing, but he stood tall, looking down at me. The space between us was non-existent. I had to tilt my head back to look at him. When I saw you in the market, he said, his voice a low, rough velvet. With them, it was like the world clicked into place. Everything I've built, everything I've done, it was all meaningless until that moment. It was all for you, for them. I just didn't know it yet. My heart was beating a frantic, wild rhythm. This was it. The moment where everything changed, where there was no going back. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was being eclipsed by something warmer, something that felt terrifyingly like hope. He lowered his head, his gaze dropping to my mouth. The air crackled. The world narrowed to the space between our lips. And then, he kissed me. It was nothing like the desperate, anonymous passion of 6 years ago. This was a kiss of homecoming. It was tender and searching, full of pain and relief and a possessiveness that was no longer frightening, but felt like an anchor. It was the taste of whiskey and blood and home. I melted against him, my hands coming up to cup his face, my body molding to his, careful of his injury. All the walls I had built, all my resistance, crumbled into dust. In the heart of his dark kingdom, surrounded by the evidence of his violent life, I surrendered. The next morning, I woke up in his bed. I was alone, but the indentation of his head was still on the pillow next to me, and the faint, masculine scent of him clung to the sheets. Sometime during the night, after the kiss had deepened and the confessions had spilled out in the darkness, he had carried me upstairs, his injured side protesting, but his determination absolute. He had laid me in his bed, pulled the covers over me, and watched me until I fell asleep. He had not pushed for more. He had simply wanted me close. Sunlight streamed into the massive room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. This room, unlike the rest of the house, felt lived in. A book was open all down on the nightstand. A stray sock lay on the floor. It was his private space, and he had invited me into it. I found him in the dining room, a vast, sun-drenched space overlooking the gardens. He was already dressed in a fresh pair of dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, the top buttons undone. He was sitting at the head of a ridiculously long table, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching our sons. Matteo and Luca were at the other end of the table, sitting in booster seats that had appeared from nowhere, happily eating pancakes slathered in syrup. They were chattering away to Isabel, who was standing nearby, a rare, small smile on her face. It was a scene of perfect domesticity, a beautiful, impossible lie. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes softened. The hard edges of the dawn were gone, replaced by the man who had whispered his fears to me in the dark. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Good morning," I replied, my voice shy. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I walked over to the boys, kissing each of them on the top of the head. They barely noticed, too intent on their breakfast. "There's coffee," he said, gesturing to a silver pot on the sideboard. I poured myself a cup, my hands not quite steady. I sat down not at the far end of the table, but in the chair next to him. It felt like a significant choice. He watched me, his expression unreadable. "How is your side?" I asked. "It's fine," he dismissed, though I could see a slight stiffness in his movements. "You're a good nurse." We sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the boys. The normalcy of it was jarring. It felt like playing house in the middle of a minefield. "Elena," he said, his voice serious, drawing my attention back to him. "We need to talk about the future." My stomach tightened. I nodded, bracing myself. "Last night, the threats against you were external. The Petrovs, Leo, they have been dealt with. The threats are gone," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You are safe now. Truly safe." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Which means you have a choice to make. A real one." My breath caught. I knew what was coming. "I can do what I should have done in the beginning," he continued, his voice even. "I can set you up anywhere in the world you want to go. A new house, a new identity, a bank account with enough money that you and the boys will never want for anything. You would be free. You would never have to see me again. I will stay out of your life. That is option 1. The offer was staggering. It was freedom. It was everything I thought I wanted. A life away from this violence, this danger, this suffocating control. A clean slate. But the thought of it, the thought of leaving, of taking the boys and never seeing him again, left a hollow, aching void in my chest. "And option 2? I whispered, my heart hammering. He reached across the small space between us, his hand covering mine on the table. His touch was warm and firm. "Option 2, he said, his voice dropping, becoming thick with emotion. "You stay. You stay here, with me. You let me be a father to my sons. You let me be a husband to you. You build a life with me. Here, in this house. In my world. He held my gaze, his eyes dark and pleading. The king was on his knees, metaphorically. He was giving me the power. He was giving me the choice. He had taken everything from me, and now he was offering it all back, plus a kingdom. But the choice was real. He would honor it. I knew he would. I looked past him, through the glass walls, to the garden where Marco was now setting up a small soccer net. I looked at my sons, their faces sticky with syrup, their laughter echoing in the vast, silent room. They were safe. They were happy. They had a father, a powerful, dangerous, fiercely protective father who had already gone to war for them. I thought of my old life, the constant, grinding worry, the loneliness, the feeling of drowning, day after day. I had been free, but my freedom was a cage of poverty and fear. This life, his life, was also a cage, but it was a cage he was willing to share, a cage he would defend with his life. I turned my hand over, my fingers lacing with his. His grip tightened, a desperate, hopeful pressure. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of my captor, my protector, my confessor, the father of my children. We stay, I said, my voice clear and steady. We choose option 2. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was like watching a dam break. The tension drained out of his shoulders, and for the first time, he looked his age, like a man who had been carrying the weight of the world and had just been allowed to set it down. He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. This was my choice. Not as a victim, not as a prisoner, but as a woman who had weighed her options and chosen her fate. I was choosing this man, this life, this dangerous, beautiful, complicated world. I was no longer a damsel in distress waiting for a rescue. I was a queen, and I was choosing to take my throne beside the king. The rest of the day passed in a dream. After he made a few quiet phone calls, the tension that had gripped the house for days finally, completely, dissipated. The extra guards vanished. The staff's movements seemed lighter. Even the air felt different, as if the whole estate had breathed a collective sigh of relief. Dante stayed home. He didn't take any calls, didn't look at his security monitors. He dedicated the entire day to us. He taught the boys how to swim, his large, scarred hands patiently holding Jejic, small bodies afloat in the crystal-clear water of the pool. I watched from a lounge chair, a soft smile on my face. He was a natural. For all his coldness and control, with his sons he was gentle, patient, and completely captivated. He let Matteo splash him in the face, and he responded not with annoyance, but with a deep, rumbling laugh that echoed in the open air. It was a sound I had never heard before, and it was beautiful. Luca, my quiet observer, swam to him and wrapped his small arms around Dante's neck, and Dante held him, his eyes closed, a look of pure, unadulterated peace on his face. He was a man who had just found the missing part of his soul. Later, we played soccer in the garden. Dante, despite his injury, ran with the boys, letting them score goal after goal, celebrating each one as if they'd just won the World Cup. I found myself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that came from deep in my belly. I hadn't laughed like that in years. The sound felt foreign and wonderful. Dante would catch my eye over the boys' heads, and we would share a look, a silent acknowledgement of the new reality we were building, moment by moment. This was a family. It was strange and unconventional and born of violence and fear, but it was real. That evening, after the boys were asleep, exhausted from their day of play, we sat on the balcony of his bedroom, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the table between us. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of diamonds scattered on black velvet. "I've never seen them so happy," I said quietly, staring out at the view. "This is how it will always be for them," he said, his voice a firm promise. "They will have everything. They will be safe." "And me?" I asked, turning to look at him. "Will I be safe?" He reached out, his fingers gently tracing my jawline. His touch sent a shiver through me, no longer of fear, but of anticipation. "I would burn the world to the ground to keep you safe, Elena," he said, his voice low and intense. "You are the heart of this family, the heart of my world. Without you, none of it matters." The sincerity in his eyes was absolute. He meant it. This terrifying, powerful man loved me. And, God help me, I was falling in love with him, too. He stood up and pulled me to my feet. "I have something for you," he said. He led me back into the bedroom, to a small, antique wooden box on his dresser. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded black velvet, was a ring. It wasn't a modern, flashy diamond. It was a vintage piece, a beautiful, intricate design of platinum and sapphires, with a central diamond that shone with a quiet, internal fire. It was elegant, timeless, and stunning. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was the one good thing she had from my father. She gave it to me before she died. She told me to give it to the woman who would heal my soul and be the mother of my children." My eyes filled with tears. The weight of the gesture, the history, a legacy of pain and hope, was overwhelming. He took the ring from the box, his large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. He didn't ask a question. He didn't get down on one knee. That wasn't his style. He made a declaration, a statement of fact that would alter the course of our lives forever. He took my left hand. "You will be my wife, Elena," he said, his voice a low, possessive, loving vow. "You will be Elena Moretti. These boys will have my name. This will be our family. This will be our future." He slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. The cool metal felt heavy, solid, a permanent and binding weight. It was a manacle and a crown, a brand and a promise. It was the final, formal solidification of my new life. I looked from the ring, which glittered in the soft light of the lamp, to his face. His eyes were searching mine, waiting. For the first time, I saw a flicker of the old uncertainty, the fear of rejection. I reached, zoomed up, my hands framing his face, and pulled him down to me. I kissed him, a kiss of acceptance, of promise, of love. It was a kiss that sealed the deal, that signed the contract on our souls. "Yes," I whispered against his lips. "Yes." He wrapped his arms around me, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe, burying his face in my hair. I could feel the tension leave his body, the final surrender to the peace he had been chasing his whole life. We stood there for a long time, just holding each other, two broken pieces that had somehow, against all odds, found a way to fit together. The final scene of my old life played out in my mind. Me, standing in the chaotic market, my purse empty, my heart full of dread, my sons pleading for a pastry I couldn't afford. It felt like a lifetime ago, like a story about a different person. I had been so lost, so alone. Now, I stood in a palace, a priceless ring on my finger, held in the arms of the most powerful man I had ever met. My sons were sleeping peacefully down the hall, their futures secure beyond my wildest dreams. I had walked through a fire I didn't know was coming, and I had emerged on the other side, not just unscathed, but transformed. The next morning, I stood on that same balcony, a cup of coffee warming my hands, the sapphire and diamond ring feeling like a natural part of me. Below, in the vast, emerald-green garden, Dante was chasing our sons, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. He caught Matteo, swinging him up onto his shoulders, and Matteo's shrieks of joy were the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Luca ran up and wrapped his arms around Dante's leg, looking up at his father with pure adoration. Dante looked up and saw me watching. He smiled, a genuine, heart-stopping smile that reached his dark eyes and made them shine. It was a smile just for me. In that moment, he wasn't Dante Moretti, the feared Mafia boss. He was just Dante, my Dante, the father of my children, my future husband, my protector, my home. I had stumbled into his life by accident, a random collision in a crowded market. But it was clear now that it wasn't an accident at all. It was fate. A brutal, beautiful, terrifying fate. My life of fear and instability was over. A new life, a life of safety, of family, of a fierce and possessive love, was just beginning. And as I smiled back at my family, my heart, once so full of anxiety, was now full of a quiet, certain, and unshakable peace. I was right where I was always meant to be,